going to get started when Karen Rice is going to monitor the chat. At the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat button. You can write a note, ask a question if you want. At the end of the presentation, we'll definitely come back and everybody can talk and ask questions at that point as well. But if it's something really relevant, like you all can't hear me or something, Karen's going to unmute and let me know that I've screwed up somehow. So anyhow, but let's get going and talk about some bulbs. I'm going to share my screen with you. I recorded this presentation for the Master Gardener Association the other day. I think they're going to put it out on YouTube or whatever. So today's presentation should be actually better because it's my second time to do it. And I'll try not to mess it up. But anyhow, we all love bulbs. And one of my most favorite things about bulbs is that it is, they are surprises in the garden. And a lot of us, as we get older, we find that that we forget where we have planted bulbs unless it's been a long time. And my garden is fairly newer garden, so I keep planting bulbs and I keep forgetting where I put them. And so when they start coming out of the ground, I get all excited. And so this last year I went around because I had so much time on my hands, and I took pictures of the landscape where the bulbs are. And anyhow, so I've enjoyed that aspect of bulbs, and that keeps me wanting to add more bulbs to my garden. So there's all kinds of types of bulbs. There's a bulb is defined of any plant that contains everything it needs in its whole life cycle under the ground within this whole root structure. There are tunicate bulbs and there are non-tunicate bulbs. And we're all very familiar with tunicate bulbs, and those are the ones in the illustration here that has the fibery structure around the top of the bulb. So you have the tunic down here, and the non-tunic are the ones that do not have that structure, and they typically don't have scales like the tunic bulb does. So the picture is of an onion, because a red onion, it's the easiest to illustrate, and it's really hard to see, but there's a formation of a bud in that bulb. So in the tunicate family, you're going to have your onions, your amaryllis, your daffodil, the narcissus, and paper whites, your crinum lilies, and then in the non-tunicate, you're going to have other lilies. And it's interesting that there are bulbs that could have the name lily in their title, but they could be tunicate bulbs and not non-tunicate bulbs. So you have to be a little careful with that. So we're very free with how we name our bulbs. What's considered a bulb? Well, a true bulb is one that has a basal plate. As you can see in this picture up here on the right, there's a basal plate right here. It has roots that grow from the basal plate. It has plump scales that look like garlic cloves. The shoots that form, that come straight out the top in the flower stem. And then they will have lateral bulbs or bulbettes that will grow on the sides. In the bulb family, however, you have your rhizomes, like we see in irises and cannas. You have your corms that are very similar to a true bulb, but they do not have the visible storage rings in their bulb. Crocus, gladiolas, things fall in the corm category. Tubers and tuberous roots, there's no basal plate and there's no tunic. Caladiums, potatoes, dahlias, and oh, we wish we could grow dahlias here. My sister's in Michigan, has dahlias that she plants in the spring, and they're just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. How to propagate bulbs. The true bulbs are really unique in that when they create a daffodil or a rain lily or something, there's two ways that they will propagate. One is they'll have a seed where their ovaries and such are. They'll have an area that has been pollinated, and those right behind the flower head, and that is the seed pod. In this particular picture to the right, you'll see where there's a green seed pod. This is not ready to be harvested. This seed pod needs to become very dried out and brown and brittle, and then you can harvest the seed. The seed from this, from any daffodil and such, may not have the same genetics as the parent plant, and that is because the flower was probably may have been cross-pollinated with a different daffodil in your garden. So therefore, the seed is not guaranteed to be the exact duplicate. So as you share seeds with your friends, you need to know that. However, on the bottom of the bulb in the ground, and most of us, this is how we see how our plants propagate, is that there are bulbs offsets that are growing on the bulb itself. And then as those mature, those are taking a part of the basal plate and the root structure with them. And as they get big enough, they will become their own plant, standalone plant. And I will show you shortly with an amaryllis how you can divide those. So there's also other ways to propagate. One of the ways we've taught in Master Gardener propagation class is bulb chipping. It's a unique process. It's not something you want to do as a layperson or a general gardener, but if you are trying to hybridize and to multiply a very special bulb that's in your garden or that you've acquired through a plant sale or something where it was very hard to find, you could sacrifice one of the bulbs, you cut it into 6 to 12 sections, as you see over here on the right, and you'll treat it with a fungicide. And the fungicide helps keep the fleshy exposed areas from getting rotted or moldy. And then you will put it in a pot with vermiculite with a portion of the basal cell. All sections have to have a portion of the basal cell, or the basal, and then you would lay those in there. The one on the right is just showing where it's being mixed up. And then you're going to cover those, put them in a cool, dark closet. You're going to keep a close monitoring on fungus, mold, and moisture in the container. Now, this can take a long time to produce a viable plant. And we've had a few people successful with our trials in our Master Gardener propagation class. And so that's a unique way to do it. Maybe you've never heard of bulb chipping. There's also scooping, scoring, and sectioning are other ways. I prefer just to go ahead and have dig them up and pull them apart and separate them that way. That's my favorite. I don't know if any of you all have ever noticed, but sometimes there's bulbils on some of them, and that's another way. Instead of having maybe seeds in a seed pod behind the flower, their seeds will be actually on the stem. And this over to the very far left is the tiger lily, and those are seeds. This is a garlic clove, and all of those could be seeds. And then the Asiatic lily over here could also have some of these bulbils. I personally have never seen any of these on my Asiatic lilies, but then I haven't actually been looking for them. Maybe many of you all have. Planting bulbs. Depth does matter. Each bulb type will have an optimum depth for planting. And if you're just like me, you've planted some more shallow than they should have been, or you've planted some deeper than they should have been. And rule of thumb is 2 to 3 times the height of the bulb if you don't want to Google it specifically. But we're all challenged. Some of us have sandy soil. It's easy to dig in, or a sandy loam. All of you in the Grapevine, Colleyville, Keller area probably have a sandy loam. And then sometimes you run into rock and clay, and it's just really hard. When they built our house, we were not the builders of the house, but when they built this house, they dumped a lot of gravel. And it may have been already on the property, but they put that in certain places where I have wanted to create flower beds. And I'm finding, it's big chunky gravel. And so even though I have 60 something post oak trees and I have sandy loam soil and it's extremely sandy, in some places when I go to dig, I am just confronted with all of this rock. It's really frustrating. So sometimes I give up after planting 30 or 40 bulbs, and I just start putting them in holes, and I'm like, I'll just mulch over them. I'll make them deeper, man-made deeper by adding mulch. And that can work. Some bulbs are very forgiving. And then some bulbs will actually pull themselves deeper into the ground, and I'll talk about that shortly. But do look up the planting depth. Do try to keep up with, do try to maintain that. It's really good for the bulb. It gives it stability. It gives it the protection from the winter, or it gives it the exposure to the warm soil, so it'll be triggered to bloom. So let's talk about, there's tulips. We haven't even mentioned tulips, but tulips are a bulb. We grow some tulips here in Texas. Somebody gave me a housewarming gift 10 years ago. And it was tulips, and I planted them in the ground, and they have sustained themselves and not multiplied. And I think I know why, because during my presentation information gathering, I found that you really need to cut the spent blooms off of a tulip at the top, right at the neck. You need to cut those blooms off, because that as those die, that impedes the bulb, the amount of nutrients that go to the bulb. And so you should try to cut back the spent head. I don't know if any of you all were aware of that, but or have a contradiction to that. But anyhow, that was something I learned. Do not cut the leaves back on any of the bulbs. Those are used to drive the nutrients back to the bulb that it's going to need during the winter. So never cut your foliage of your leaves off of your bulbs after they have bloomed. So some of the companion plants for tulips, and tulips are really pretty, but they can fill a big space. And you can go to the botanic gardens, you can see hundreds and hundreds of square feet of tulips. And then they will actually pull those up, and then they'll plant something else. Well, in our garden, we might not want to do that. We one thing that that really helps a home landscape is to plant something that will complement the tulip after the tulip is gone, and maybe hide the foliage. So you could plant tulips where maybe you have a columbine. Candy tuft looks really pretty under a tulip. Creeping phlox, and it may have already spent its bloom, but it may have a green foliage and left for the rest of the season, and the tulip pops off of that. So consider a companion plant. We're going to talk more about that later in the process, or in the PowerPoint. One thing that tulips, they are great container plants, and because the containers tend to be cooler than the ground in our winter. So consider putting tulips in a container. So we have different daffodils. There's so many different daffodils, but I'm going to talk about ones that possibly the Grapevine Garden Club has sold, or the Master Gardener Association is selling or has sold. The Salome is a really reliable alternative to a yellow daffodil. It's really pretty. It has the pale white bracts, and then it has the beautiful peach colored center. Those can get about 4 inches in diameter. They make quite an impact when blooming. I have always just purchased 12 of this and 10 of this and 8 of this. And I find that my large garden needs 100 of this and 100 of this. And so I'm going to need to go in and separate my clumps and or purchase more of the same thing. So they do make an impact, but in a large garden, you need a lot of them to make a bigger impact. The one on the lower right here, the sweetness, is a beautiful, sweet little bloom, and it's called the Daffodil of the South, and it's only 2.5 inches across. And you have to remember that when looking at pictures, these both look to be about the same size. Well, that's just the zoom on them. So you really have to pay attention to the size of the flower for the impact in your garden. But both are very good for choices for us. One of the daffodils that Karen added to our list this year is the Rip Van Winkle, which I think is fascinating. It's a multi-petal bloom. It's a hybrid that they've come out with. It blooms in mid-spring. It will thrive in full sun. Most of us have post oak trees, and so the leaves are down until late March, early April, and so there's always full sun under the trees. And then as the trees fill out, there's not as much full sun. We have to be very careful in Texas when people say it's a full sun plant, because we know how damaging true full sun can be in Texas. But we do have full sun under our oak trees until April. And it's not a damaging full sun, and it warms the ground. It forces the bulbs to bloom, and they're very pretty. So up here on the right, I want to show you, these are some offsets of my daffodils that I pulled up out of the ground to show you. So here again, you've got bulbs that are multiplying underground, and you can pull those up, pull them apart, as long as they have their own root and basal plate attached, and you can just spread those out if you want. We all have plenty of time now because we're all home. So this one at the bottom is a Chizetta, and Chizettas tend to have multiple blooms per stem. They're a taller daffodil, and you can see on this picture here, there's already the seed pod area where the seeds will form after it's pollinated. And these will get about, as again, I said, 16 inches tall. However, their foliage tends to be pretty tall. And what sometimes you'll find is that the foliage impedes your sight line to the blooms. And so I noticed that on my Chizettas. They're a different variety. They're sweet daffodil, but the foliage is very tall. And I think the foliage is 4 inches taller than the bloom. Paper whites. My sister has always forced these in the winter. Of course, she's in Michigan, and any floral in the winter is ideal for her. However, I find that they have a strong odor, and I don't care in the house. So I purchased some and put them in the. I purchased them and put them in the ground next to the driveway, and as I was walking, when they were in bloom, I'd always catch a whiff of them, and I always look around to see if I had a cow living in my front yard, because to me they smell a little bit like a cow. But anyhow, some people have love the fragrance, but they will grow in the ground here. So if you want to buy some and you want to force them in your house, they're very easy to grow. force those with some amaryllis. They're just beautiful. And then take both and put them both in the garden. And you'll enjoy them for many years here in Texas. So here's an amaryllis, and I love amaryllis. I have forced quite a few of these for Christmas, and really enjoyed them and moved them out to the garden. But my understory trees have gotten pretty heavy, and so my amaryllis don't get nearly as much sun as they need in the first few months of the year. And so mine are not blooming well, and I'm going to have to possibly dig them up and move them. But I wanted to show you all, and I'm going to quit sharing the screen. I dug one of mine up, and I wanted to show you in real life what it looks like. Larry, can we get my picture? Mr. Larry? Can you all see this?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay, well, I can't see me. I don't need to see me. Okay, so here is an amaryllis bulb, and I washed it off, but you can see I'm going to pull this one apart from it. And this one will take years to grow to bloom, but see how it has beautiful roots? It has its own basal plate. And so there you go. You've just made 2 amaryllis, and you can share those. It's really fascinating and perfect. I actually had 2 babies on that one and had pulled one off the other day. So they're very viable. We'll go back to my presentation. So the only thing with amaryllis is that they're not hardy below 10 degrees Fahrenheit. We hardly have ever seen those temperatures here. If we were to, one of the best things to do is to go put more mulch on top of them or cover them with a box or something for a couple of days until we heat back up. But I don't think we have to worry about this. But they do need sun to bloom. And so that's why mine are not blooming. So let's talk about this pretty plant, this bulb. This is a giant snowflake, and Karen has that on our list this year for purchase. And a lot of us might be familiar with a plant that looks just like this, but it's called a snowdrop. It's a smaller variety of this, and but this, I think, is just fascinating because it has, it's tall, it has these white spots of color in your garden, and then it has these cute little green dots on the bells. And I have the snowdrop and have really enjoyed that in my garden. This one gets to be a little taller than the snowdrop, and they do like more moist soil, but they add quite a different texture to your garden. And the picture to the left will show you the offshoots to the bulbs there. So easy to multiply and divide. So let's talk about Spanish bluebells. I believe that this is one of my most favorite bulbs. And one little bulb can produce such a big plant with lots of green foliage, and they multiply really easily. But let me tell you this. I wanted to dig a few up for this presentation and take pictures of my own bulbs. And I went out, and as any gardener, ungloved, I just stick my hand in the ground where I know that they are, and I'm fishing around in there. I didn't find a toad or a little garden snake or and I definitely didn't find a bulb, and I couldn't understand where the bulbs went. And then I did some research, and I found out that they have these contractile root systems, and they pull themselves deeper into the ground. So they were probably 6, 8 inches below ground. Whereas when I probably planted them, I probably planted them 2 or 3 times their size, which is very small and shallow, and probably 3 inches. So now I probably would have to get a trowel or a shovel to go dig them up. But anyhow, that was kind of funny that I couldn't find them, and I was just like, maybe I need to go find a picture to see exactly where I put them. But I have several clumps of them, and they make such a nice statement in early spring in your garden. So maybe some of you already have them and are enjoying them. Here are their seed pods, and you can see the seeds there. So what I don't know in my mind is if I wanted to pull the bulbs up to see if they were multiplying themselves, or if the bunches were getting bigger from seed growth, and I couldn't tell because I didn't find the bulbs. So grape hyacinth.
We have a quick question.
Okay.
From Robin on the previous one. How tall are those plants? How do they?
The Spanish bluebells can be about 10 to 12 inches tall. They're flower stalk. The greenery, now this variety of plant, Spanish bluebells, the greenery is normally just about 6 to 8 inches tall. So a lower, towards the front of the flower bed, they make the biggest statement, not back in the back of the flower bed.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Larry. So grape hyacinth, I got to tell you a story here. My good friend, Master Gardener friend, her father was moving, and in his yard, in the grass, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of grape hyacinth bulbs. And she went over there one day and dug and dug and dug and gave me a bag with probably 500 little bulbs. Some of them were the size of a pea. Some of them were smaller than that. You could barely tell that the foliage had a bulb on it. And then some of them were the size of a dime or a nickel. And so I went along my driveway and I said, well, these are so tiny. I'm going to plant these right here along the driveway in batches. Some of the batches have not survived, and I'll probably be 100 years old before they fill in. But they're real good at multiplying in their little space, but their bulbs are so tiny that they aren't very good about multiplying horizontally. And so really, really sweet. What I like about these is because their greenery comes up in the fall. Like right now, the greenery, this picture in the middle, is in my yard. So here are the little bunches. There's probably 50 bulbs in those little bunches, and that area is probably just about 5 inches by 5 inches. And the greenery will stay there all winter. And I love anything that stays green during the winter. And then in the spring, the sweet little flower stalks come up, and they're only 4 inches tall, 4 to 5 inches tall. Now, the muscari, there are a lot of different kinds of muscari varieties, and there are some that are a lot taller, and then some that are obviously different colors. So if you wanted to look into different varieties, this one tends to grow a little bit more wild here in Texas, and is a survivor of our droughts and temperatures here. So something to consider. These are great in a little pot as well. You might enjoy them there. Alum. Those are amazing. Here, the one on the left is probably the variety that I have in my garden. And I've seen them, like Martha Stewart has had them. A lot of HGTV planting shows show them. They're in a garden where somebody afforded to buy, let's say 50 to 100 of the bulbs and planted them, very strategically among a companion plant, they make a huge statement in your garden. But in my garden, where I've only planted 3 bulbs next to each other, it'll take years to make a statement in my garden. So I need to acquire more or divide these. I did have a little help dividing them because the other day I was walking past my flower bed and I looked down and there are these what looked to be garlic cloves on the ground. And I was like, well, what the heck are those? And it didn't appear to be a hole in the ground or anything. And I knew that's exactly where I had planted my allium. And so I reached down, I picked them up, I sniffed them, they smelled like garlic. All of them have a garlicky smell or onion smell. And then I found one next to them that had been half eaten, and you could see the little teeth marks in it. So somebody decided that they were hungry, wanted to dig those up and eat them. Now, I will tell you that I didn't plant mine 6 to 8 inches deep like I should have. And so maybe that was my problem. Maybe the rodent wouldn't have gotten to them if I had done that. But they are fun. This little one here, Graceful Beauty, is a lot smaller flower head, and it's a shorter plant. But what a neat little snowball-looking addition to your garden in the June time frame. I'm going to believe that one probably blooms about the same time that the Star of Persia blooms. Asiatic lilies, a bulb, and a lot of us have them. And what's unique about Asiatic lilies is that they will form these little bulbettes. So they don't have offsets as much as they have these little bulbs. Over to the right, you'll see the little bulbs on the stem. I dug these out of my yard. These are just very small ones, like babies. The Asiatic lilies come, they bloom, and their flower stalks are still green, whereas all the daffodils and things have faded months ago. The Asiatic lily flower stalks are still green. Now, they are laying over in the garden, and I probably could get away with cutting them off at this point. But anyhow, a beautiful addition to the garden, and they will shoot up. They'll have multiple flowers on one stem, and very pretty. This one is called Purple Rain or Patricia's Pride, and it's a nice alternative to the traditional orange Asiatic lily that a lot of us have. Now, this is one of my favorite plants since I've become a master gardener and learned a lot about rain lilies. It's not a plant that the traditional homeowner would really know much about at all, and you really have to learn about it from fellow gardeners and fellow friends. Some people consider these to be invasive in their garden. Well, I haven't planted enough of them for that to happen here, but I do have 4 or 5 different varieties. Karen Rice mentioned to me the other day that she has a variety, an apricot variety, that has taken over a lot of her garden, and I'm more than welcome to come dig some of those up. So I might come over to Karen's house and do that. But anyhow, you're a little hesitant as a gardener to, when a friend says, well, it's taking over my garden, you're just a little hesitant to put it in your own garden. It takes a lot of nerve to do that, especially when you have had to fight off other invasive plants in your garden. We learn from experience. So, but this is neat. This is a seed pod head here that I cut off one of my rain lilies. And you can see the flaky seeds that come out of it. Again, the seed pod was brown and dried and ready to burst open. To the right is in my garden next to the host plant, where the seed pod, last year, the seeds, I sprinkled them around the plant, and I messed them with my hand into the mulch and sort of into the soil a little bit. So you can see all these little babies are coming up. Now, I will tell you that those little babies may take years to mature into a plant like this. And and a lot of them will die off for various reasons. Maybe not enough sun, too much coverage from the parent foliage, just various reasons where they might die off. But I may be left with a few in that area. So here's a pretty pink one. What I've noticed from rain lilies is that, and this is a really funny story. I did a bulb presentation a couple years ago to a group, and I dug bulbs out of my garden. I didn't have very many rain lilies, and so I went to an area where I had some daffodils and rain lilies planted, and they were, around coneflowers, around other things. And so I dug up some bulbs and took them to the presentation. I showed them. I said, these are rain lily bulbs and this and that. I come home, I replant them, and no, they weren't. They were daffodils. So they didn't care. They didn't know. But anyhow, I always look for a tinge of red. And you can see up here on these bulbs, a little tinge of red on the foliage down towards the tunic, the tunicate. And that kind of will tell you that it's because daffodils are not going to have that. And so if you really were having to look between plants and they're two clumps next to each other, you might be able to discern that way. Again, rain lilies are going to multiply just like other other true bulbs. And remember, it says it's a lily, but it is a tunicate bulb. And you see the offsets here, and easy to multiply. And in fact, I have some right here in front of me, and I'm going to stop sharing and show them to you. So here's one out of my garden. And can you all see that well? So you can just pull this off again, and there you go. There's the bulb with the roots on it and everything. So, and one on the other side. So if you have a lot of time on your hands, you can go dig up a clump of your rain lilies, and you can spread them out in your garden. And we all have a lot of time on our hands right now. So the ones here on the right are a different variety in my garden. And then 2 days ago, I actually found another variety blooming that were like the one on the right here, but they were a darker pink. Again, I don't have a lot of any one, so I'm sort of excited about spreading them out. The other thing that Karen mentioned to me is that the seeds possibly are not viable after about 2 to 3 months. So if you plan, I collected some of the seeds thinking I might share them with someone, but they're probably about a month and a half old now in my bag, and they may not be viable here in another month or two. So I may just have to go put them back in my garden. So anyhow, so consider rain lilies. They do make a neat statement to the garden. Here's a neat one. Several of you all have. You've either purchased it at a plant sale with Grapevine, or you've received it from a friend. I received mine from my father-in-law years ago, and it is a lily. It is called African false hosta, and it has it's really unique. It's a non-tunicate lily. It has these little offsets on it. It grows very close to the surface of the ground. I love it because it'll start shooting up in March, and the little leaves as they come out have all these dark spots on them. And then as they mature, the spots fade. And it kind of acts like a hosta. I love it because it fills in areas. I have it mixed in with some mondo grass, not the very dwarf mondo, but the average mondo, not the tall mondo. And then I have it with hellebores. I have it in a lot of places in my garden, and it multiplies very quickly on its own. And I do believe it throws its seeds. It makes this flower stalk with a really white and green bulb on the end of it. It does not actually make a flower per se that you see with the naked eye. But a really neat plant, obviously not native to Texas, but we all have shade. A lot of us have shade, and it's a great addition. And it'll stay green until our first frost. So that's what's kind of cool about it. Oxblood lilies, a fall blooming bulb, and we have several. There are several fall blooming bulbs. Many of us have these in bloom right now in our yard. Again, I don't have hundreds of them. I've determined that I like things in mass, so as I purchase or procure from friends, I want to buy or get a lot of bulbs and plant them in mass and go to the effort, because what I have in my garden right now are not photo worthy because they bloomed at different times, and there's just too few of them to take pictures of. But so the bag over here on the left represents what I should have planted, and but here it is, just beautiful. Between the river rock, I bet if you pulled back a lot of that river rock, you would have bulbs that tried to bloom that are underneath there, and that could be dug up and shared. But it's not my garden, so I can't take them. But anyhow, beautiful addition. It's in the amaryllis family, and as you can tell, it looks a lot like a baby amaryllis. And some people call them schoolhouse lilies. The spider lily, the lycoris, beautiful little flower, again, planted in mass, are just gorgeous. I have 4 different areas in my garden where I have them. The first bloom is the one that gets the most sun, and then on down. Sadly, because when they go dormant, you don't know where they are, I decided to fill an empty spot in my patio bed, and I put a pot in that area. And I just recently moved the pot, and the green foliage is coming up on the lycoris, but I don't believe that they're going to bloom. One, they need the warmth of the sun to warm the soil to encourage them to bloom, and that just didn't happen because I had a pot on them. I have some behind a Rosa Sharon that don't get the late afternoon sun. And we're just making bulbs. Why do they need sun? Well, the sun warms the soil and triggers them to bloom. And the Rosa Sharon must shade the area, so those are just now coming up, and they will bloom. So this year, possibly, I should just move some of them to where they can get more sun. But really pretty, a lot of varieties. Smith County Master Gardeners are holding a sale right now, or soon. You can look them up, and they're selling some varieties of these that are really unique. So something to consider, and again, fall blooming. And let's talk about the large bulb crinum lilies, and they've always called these cemetery lilies. And I always thought daffodils were the ones that would mark areas for years to come. I grew up in East Tennessee, and we had the Kate's Cove up in the Smoky Mountains. And the settlers had come in, and they had put their homesteads there in the cove. And one of the only plants that they had as a hobby were their daffodils. And the women would plant them around their cabins. And when the cabins have all gone away, the daffodils are still there. And if you go at the right time of year and you tour the cove, you will actually see the daffodils where the homesteads were. And so that's kind of a neat feature. So that means those daffodils could be 100, 120 years old. However, crinum lilies, those are more of a longer lasting bulb than the daffodil. And so this is where you may see in older cemeteries large clumps of crinums. Crinums are a beautiful addition to a garden. They do take a lot of space. Their bulbs grow to mammoth size, and they're very, very hard to dig out and separate. So you might want to be very cautious with that. And if you invite, say you have some, because you have a mature garden and you invite somebody to come dig them out, they might want to bring a backhoe with them because they really are difficult to dig out. So let's talk about companion planting and with bulbs. And the main reason I'm interested in companion planting with bulbs is because a lot of times our bulbs are dormant when we're trying to enjoy our gardens. We're out on our patio and the bulbs have gone dormant, and there's a big empty space where you had a big batch of Spanish bluebells or daffodils. So I thought of, I've not been very good at seeking out companion plants in the past, but I plan to do more of that as I plant more bulbs and plant different plants in my garden, because companion plants will fill the space the bulb left when it was dormant, but you can't plant necessarily right in the mass of bulbs because you'll disturb them. So you have to plant around them. And there are a lot of different types of plants we're going to talk about that will work with daffodils. They hide the companion plant will hide the dry foliage of the daffodil as well as it dries out, and you were told not to clip it back, so don't clip it back. And it provides a different level of texture. And lastly, for me, as I age, it's a marker of where the bulb is planted. So let's say I have 2 hostas or 2 leopard plants, and I knew that right between them I planted daffodils. So it's a reminder in my mind of where maybe I had planted some bulbs. But be mindful, the companion plants have to have the same requirements as the bulbs itself. So I will tell you that Dick Pafford posted on Facebook yesterday or the day before an absolutely beautiful picture of his oxblood lilies grown in and amongst yellow lantana. And it was just beautiful. You know how yellow lantana tends to be lower to the ground. The oxblood lilies came right above that. And that is a great companion planting combo. And the red and the yellow just really just look striking together. So something to consider if you have bulbs and you don't want to see the foliage as it dries out, you might do something like that. Other plants that work great are hostas, hellebores, but in the summer, other things such as daylilies, coreopsis, summer phlox it'll hide everything. It's beautiful. It's tall. It'll hide all the foliage, and it won't come up and be prevalent until after the daffodils are have bloomed. So catmint, lower growing plant that would look really pretty in an area, and then daffodils or another lily coming up between them. So the lower left I thought was really unique. It's kind of a busy garden. It's early spring. There are a lot of things growing and a lot of things just coming out of the ground. So what you have here is daffodils and other bulbs growing, blooming, and just that fresh new greenery coming from all your other plants. So here in about 3 to 4 months, that garden, you'll have no sign of daffodils, but that garden will be full of beautiful other flowering plants. So there's a reason for putting a plan together for a garden and being able to enjoy it for months to come. But that's it, guys. And I hope you all learned something about bulbs. And if any of you all have any bulbs that you want to share, just let me know.